The end of the 19th century. Chicago. An event officially hailed as a triumph of human genius and progress. The World's Columbian Exposition. It opened its doors on May 1, 1893, forever changing the perception of architectural and engineering possibilities of that time. However, behind the snow-white facades and dazzling illumination lies a demographic and logistical riddle of such scale that it is capable of casting doubt on the accepted version of American history. We are faced with official attendance figures that, upon closer inspection, begin to contradict common sense. It is stated that 27 million people visited the fair. To understand the scale, it is enough to remember that the entire population of the United States at that time was about 65 million. This means that practically every second resident of the country, from infants to the deep elderly, would have had to drop everything and come to Chicago. Before we start unraveling this ball of historical contradictions and diving into the secrets of the past, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. This helps algorithms show the truth to more people. If half the country had really converged on the exhibition, the crowd should have represented a natural demographic slice of society. We should have seen numerous families, elderly parents, grandparents, adult children, and, of course, a huge number of toddlers. However, archival evidence paints a completely different, almost frightening picture. The mass of people filling the giant squares of the exhibition looks unnaturally homogeneous. It is an endless sea of young men. Finding an elderly person in this crowd is a practically impossible task. People of advanced age, who in any traditional society make up a significant part of the population, are absent here as a class. Even stranger is the shortage of women and children. Of course, they are present, but their numbers are incomparably small compared to the prevailing mass of working-age men. One gets the impression that we are observing not a family holiday or a cultural event of a global scale, but a kind of review or a centralized gathering of a specific age group. Families in full force, with children of different ages, practically do not fall into the field of view of the chroniclers of that time. Added to these demographic oddities is another detail that stands out from the general pattern. The exhibition opened in May, on the threshold of summer, when the weather should encourage light walks. However, the overwhelming majority of visitors are dressed as if it were deep autumn or early winter. Heavy coats and warm, multi-layered clothing on thousands of people create a dissonance with the stated time of year. This mismatch with the season only reinforces the feeling of the unreality of what is happening, as if these people ended up here suddenly, unprepared for the local climate, or arrived from places with completely different weather conditions. The first thing that comes to a skeptic's mind to explain these anomalies is foreign tourists. One might assume that the 27 million visitors were not only Americans, but also guests from Europe, eager to see the wonders of the New World. After all, in the late 19th century, Europe was densely populated, and interest in overseas curiosities was great. This theory could explain the absence of American elderly and children. It would be the active youth who set off on a long journey across the ocean. It seems the puzzle pieces fit. But this hypothesis shatters into pieces as soon as we turn to the dry facts about the transport capabilities of that era. Aviation between continents did not yet exist, and the only way to the exhibition from Europe lay across the Atlantic Ocean on ships. You might think these are foreign tourists who came to see a wonder of the world. But if we open the transport documents of that time, a surprise awaits us that destroys this theory completely. In the late 19th century, when aviation existed only in the wildest dreams of science fiction writers, the ocean was the sole bridge between the old and new worlds. To get from Europe to America required a long and dangerous sea voyage. If we turn to the ship logs and statistical reports of transport companies of that period, a picture emerges that completely refutes the hypothesis of millions of foreign tourists. The combined capacity of the passenger fleet of all transatlantic lines simply could not physically support such a flow of people. the maximum carrying capacity of ships of that time, taking into account all classes of cabins, from luxurious first-class apartments to overcrowded third-class holds, allowed for the transport of no more than 500,000 people a year. Even if we allow for a fantastic scenario in which every European who stepped onto American shores in 1893 immediately went to Chicago, this would amount to less than 2% of the total number of visitors to the fair. The ocean was an insurmountable bottleneck. Thus, the version that the crowd was created by curious foreigners crumbles when it collides with the reality of 19th century logistics. The only option remains. These 27 million people were locals. And here we encounter an even deeper contradiction, this time of an economic nature. If we discard the 500,000 theoretical foreigners, it turns out that the exhibition was visited by more than 26 million Americans. This means that almost half of the entire population of the United States at that time had to leave their homes and set off on a long journey. But what was happening in the country at that moment? 1893 entered history books as the year of the beginning of one of the most devastating financial crises. The banking system was collapsing, businesses were closing, and thousands of people were losing their savings and roofs over their heads. The country was gripped by the Great Depression of that time, accompanied by unemployment and despair. In agrarian America of the late 19th century, a significant part of the population was tied to the land. Farmers, who formed the backbone of the economy, lived in a rigid cycle of agricultural work. Leaving fields unattended, abandoning livestock and the farm for the sake of a leisure trip to another state would be equivalent to economic suicide, especially in the midst of a raging crisis. Nevertheless, official statistics insist that at the height of a financial catastrophe, half the country found the funds and time for travel. It sounds absurd. The able-bodied population, which should be fighting for survival, moves en masse to Chicago to walk among pavilions. Moreover, the structure of the crowd we spoke of earlier, predominantly young men, does not fit the image of farmers coming to relax at all. It resembles an organized relocation of labor resources, or the military, rather than a tourist boom. One gets the feeling that these people were held back neither by obligations to employers, nor by care for their own farms, nor by a lack of money. If these were not foreigners blocked by the ocean, and not Americans busy surviving, then who are these people? And for what sake did they arrive? To understand this, we need to look at exactly what they were shown and how it was built. After all, the history of the construction of exhibitions hides even more riddles. To understand the true scale of what was happening, it is necessary to shift our gaze from the crowd of visitors to the scenery in which this action unfolded. The architectural background of these events raises no fewer questions than the demographic composition of those present. If we turn to the chronicles of construction, we will discover technological anomalies that cannot be explained by the official historical version. 17 years before the events in Chicago, in 1876, a similar international exhibition was held in Philadelphia, dedicated to the centennial of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was there that the scenario of erecting cyclopean structures was worked out in timeframes that even today, with heavy construction equipment and computer design, seem fantastic. The territory of the exhibition in Philadelphia occupied 115 hectares. According to official reports, in less than 2 years, 200 buildings were erected on this wasteland. We are not talking about light tents or wooden canopies, but about monumental structures that astound with their engineering scope. The main exhibition building at that time was considered the largest room in the world. Its area was almost 9 hectares, its length reached 600 meters, and its width was 140. The foundation of this temporary structure rested on 600 stone piers, and the frame consisted of complex trusses made of wrought iron. It is claimed that this giant was assembled in just a year and a half. Even more impressive is the machinery hall. This building, 400 meters long and 120 meters wide, was built, if documents are to be believed, in just 6 months. It served as a showcase for the advanced technologies of the 19th century. Inside, 8,000 machines and mechanisms operated, driven by a steam engine weighing 650 tons. To withstand such a colossal load and vibration, a foundation and floors of industrial strength were required. It is impossible to call such a structure a temporary pavilion. It was a full-fledged factory floor, built with a margin of safety for centuries. The paradox lies in the fact that official history calls these buildings temporary decorations, subject to demolition immediately after the event. However, the facts say otherwise. Some of these temporary buildings, built in the same haste, have survived to this day, or stood for a significant part of the 20th century, demonstrating phenomenal stability. For example, the art gallery building, known as Memorial Hall, was made of granite, brick, and iron. It stands to this day. The Horticultural Hall, a structure of glass and stone, stood until the mid-20th century and was destroyed only by the powerful Hurricane Hazel in 1954. A logical question arises. If the buildings were built as temporary, why were they erected from granite and iron on capital foundations? And why do some structures, such as Memorial Hall, calmly survive centuries, while others, no less grandiose, such as the main building or machinery hall, were hastily destroyed or sold for scrap immediately after the exhibitions closed? One gets the impression that the destruction of these architectural masterpieces was not an economic necessity, but an intentional erasure of traces. The remaining buildings prove that technologies allowed building for ages, but if the framework of reality was created with such thoroughness, then its filling must have matched the scale of the plan. But it is not only the buildings that amaze. Look at the thousands of statues adorning the facades. Historians say they were sculpted on the spot. But the technologies of that time hint at a completely different process, a process of the industrial cloning of history. The number of sculptural compositions adorning the facades and interiors of the exhibition pavilions in Chicago numbered in the thousands. These were not just single figures, but complex, multi-figure ensembles, allegorical scenes, and monumental statues, which, it seemed, should have been created over decades of painstaking work by the best masters of Europe. However, according to official chronology, all this splendor arose literally from nothing in a matter of months. Historians claim that sculptors worked on site, but the volume of work performed simply does not fit into the capabilities of human hands, if we assume the use of traditional methods of stone carving or bronze casting. The solution lies in technologies that can boldly be called the forerunner of modern 3D printing. Archival data indicate the massive use of a material called staff. It was a special mixture of powdered gypsum, cement, glycerin, and dextrin, diluted with water to the consistency of thick molasses. This composition possessed unique properties. It was plastic, easily poured into molds of any complexity, set quickly, and, most importantly, after drying, could imitate any texture, from noble marble to rough granite. It was the liquid stone of the 19th century, allowing construction sites to be turned into factories for the production of antiquity. The process of creating giants was put on industrial rails. The sculptor created only a miniature maquette, a small figure worked out in detail. Then the mechanical magic of that time came into play. With the help of special frames and copying devices working on the principle of a pantograph, the dimensions of the maquette were scaled up. Coordinates were taken from the small model and transferred to a huge frame, which was then sheathed and poured with staff. This was not art in the high sense, but industrial cloning. Dozens, hundreds of identical elements, columns, atlantes, and caryatids were stamped according to single patterns, creating the illusion of an ancient, rich culture where just yesterday there was an open field. This technology forces us to look in a new way at recognized masterpieces of world architecture, which we are accustomed to considering the heritage of deep antiquity. If in Chicago they were able to create an entire antique city indistinguishable from the real one in a year, then what prevented applying this method in Europe or the Russian Empire? A bold hypothesis arises regarding famous palaces and museums, such as the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. Perhaps what we see today is the result of the same fast decor technology. The buildings could have been empty brick boxes, giant lofts of the 19th century, which were then filled with ancient interiors in the shortest possible time. Columns that seem like monolithic marble may actually be wooden structures, skillfully covered with that same staff or plastered to look like stone. This explains how, after fires, palaces rose from the ashes with incredible speed, overgrown with complex stucco and decor, the creation of which would have taken centuries of manual labor. Thus, the exhibition in Chicago was not just a demonstration of achievements. It was a testing ground where the technology of creating reality was honed. History ceased to be a chronicle of times and turned into a product that can be designed, cast in a mold, and mounted on any surface. We have understood how they created the scenery, but the main question is, why? If you look closely at the exhibits, it becomes creepy. It does not look like entertainment. It looks like a survival school for those who know nothing about our world. If we turn away from the architectural decorations and carefully study the contents of the pavilions, a picture emerges that least of all resembles an entertainment event. The internal content of the World's Fair in Chicago, as well as subsequent expositions in Omaha or Buffalo, was structured with a pedantry inherent more in academic institutions or training camps than in vanity fairs. It was a gigantic, total school, where millions of visitors were instilled with basic knowledge about the structure of the surrounding world in a short time. Passing through enfilades of halls, these crowds of people seemed to download the necessary cultural and domestic code into themselves, turning from a disparate mass into a unified society. The expositions were built on the principle of visual aids for those seeing this world for the first time. Huge sections were devoted to ethnography and anthropology. Representatives of various peoples, including indigenous Indians, were displayed in recreated villages and dwellings, like living exhibits in a biological atlas. Visitors walked and observed the way of life of these people, studying human diversity the way children study animal species in a zoo. This was not cultural exchange in the modern sense. It was a classification of species, a demonstration of who inhabits the planet, what races and ways of life exist. People were given a complete picture of geopolitical reality, clearly designating their own place in this hierarchy. Particular attention is drawn to the Woman's Building and adjacent expositions dedicated to home economics. It would seem that women of the 19th century, raised in traditional families, should have absorbed the skills of housekeeping and childcare with their mother's milk. However, the exhibition offered large-scale training programs in exactly these seemingly instinctive disciplines. Entire halls were set aside to demonstrate how to properly swaddle, feed, and raise infants. It looked not like an exchange of experience, but like instructions for those who have no ancestral memory or family continuity. One got the impression that the skills of motherhood and housekeeping were being introduced artificially as a new social program. But the most shocking and technological element of this educational system was the incubators for premature babies. In the late 19th century, at exhibitions in Chicago and Omaha, this medical equipment was demonstrated as an attraction. Behind glass lay living infants, whose lives were supported by machines. For viewers of that time, this must have been a real shock, breaking the idea of the natural course of things. Technology invaded the sacred process of birth and survival. The demonstration of incubators accustomed society to the thought that life can be supported and controlled technically, that a human is a biological mechanism that can be completed with the help of science. It was a powerful psychological barrier that was broken before the eyes of the astonished public. Peering into the faces of visitors captured in thousands of photographs, it is difficult to notice idle fun. Their expressions are serious, focused, and even tense. They do not look like revelers who came to drink lemonade and watch fireworks. They resemble diligent students at an important lecture who are afraid to miss a single word. Groups of men and women methodically go around pavilion after pavilion, absorbing information. Their clothing is uniform, their behavior disciplined. One gets the feeling that they were brought here not to have fun, but to undergo an accelerated course of socialization. History was uploaded to them through statues, geography through ethnic villages, and biology through medical pavilions. Millions of adults being taught elementary things. Where did they come from in such numbers? The answer may lie in the smoking ruins of American cities, which blazed with frightening regularity. To solve the mystery of the appearance of millions of people who seem to emerge from nowhere at the world's fairs, we must turn to the chronicles of catastrophes that shook the American continent throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. The statistics of these disasters look not just frightening, but systemic. From 1762 to 1928, 101 major urban fires were recorded in the United States, in which settlements burned down almost to the ground. In the 19th century, this trend reached its peak. Practically every year, one major city disappeared from the face of the earth. Chicago, Boston, Baltimore, San Francisco, the list goes on endlessly. Official history attributes this to wooden buildings and a lack of safety standards, but the frequency and totality of the destruction compel us to think about intentional clearing of territories. If we transport ourselves to 1904, to Baltimore, where fire destroyed 1,500 buildings, or to San Francisco in 1906, which survived an earthquake and subsequent fire, we will see people on the ruins whose behavior does not correspond at all to the psychology of victims. Instead of grief, panic, attempts to save remnants of property, or searching for missing relatives, the chronicles record a strange, detached calm. Crowds of men and women wander among the smoking skeletons of buildings with expressions of curiosity on their faces. They are dressed in good suits. Many hold their hands in their pockets or behind their backs, examining the scale of destruction as if they are on an excursion in ancient Pompeii, and not on the ashes of their own home. The example of San Francisco is particularly indicative. On surviving footage, one can see groups of men who have comfortably settled on high ground, set up chairs, and are watching the city burn down. For them, this is not a tragedy depriving them of shelter, but a grandiose fire show. The absence of emotional attachment to the city being destroyed suggests that these people are not native inhabitants. They lose nothing here because nothing of this belonged to them. This is the behavior of tourists who were brought to a cleared site. Comparing these shots with photographs of visitors to the world's fairs, it is impossible to shake the feeling of déjà vu. We see the same anthropological type, middle-aged people, predominantly men, dressed in identical dark coats and hats. And again, a complete absence of the elderly and an extremely small number of children. On the ruins of burned cities, just as on the alleys of exhibition parks, there are no frail old people who need to be saved or supported. One gets the impression that fires performed the function of a reset button, physically eliminating old infrastructure and possibly the previous population, while the exhibitions served as a reception and training point for those who came to replace them. The phenomenon of orphan trains, the mass movement of tens of thousands of children left without parents from the East Coast to the West, fits perfectly into this gloomy mosaic. This is a historical fact. Huge masses of minors were centrally distributed across new territories. If we connect all these dots, the logistics of a global resettlement emerge. The old world was destroyed by fire, the territory was cleared, and then filled with new able-bodied units having no memory of the past, and children who could be raised in any required paradigm. It all folds into a single picture. Fires clearing the territory, trains with orphans carrying a new gene pool, and exhibitions, where crowds of people without a past are brought to explain to them how this brave new world works. Everything we discussed earlier, from logistical inconsistencies and architectural anomalies to the strange behavior of people on the ashes, comes together into a single, frightening, but logically complete mosaic. The World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, like its counterparts in other cities, was not a celebration of progress in the sense that textbooks presented to us. It was a grandiose machine, a giant mechanism for creating and tuning a new civilization. We are observing not the natural course of history, but a process of the artificial restart of society on the territory of an entire continent. Imagine the scale of this operation. First, the territory is cleared. Old cities, bearing the imprint of the previous era, or inhabited by excess people, are destroyed by fire. Fires in Chicago, Boston, Baltimore, and San Francisco act like an eraser, wiping everything unnecessary from the map. Then, onto the cleared space, via railway lines and those very orphan trains, a new human resource is delivered. These are people without a past, without ancestral roots, without memory of what was here before. But an empty vessel needs to be filled with something, otherwise chaos is inevitable. And here, the world's fairs enter the stage. These pompous, hastily erected cities of gypsum and staff served as points of mass firmware updates for consciousness. The millions of men and women we see in the photographs are not tourists. They are new citizens undergoing the final stage of initiation. They needed to be given a past so they would feel ground under their feet, and they were given it in the form of thousands of antique statues cloned by industrial means. They were shown, "Look, you are the heirs of the great culture of Greece and Rome." They needed to be given survival skills in the new technological reality, and they were led into pavilions where they were taught to use electricity, machines, and even care for their own children, as if these instincts had been erased. Incubators with infants, ethnographic villages, machine halls. All these are elements of a single curriculum. People were explained who they are, where they live, who their neighbors are, and how this world works. That is precisely why there are so few old people in the shots. In the new system, created from scratch, there was simply no place for them. Old people are carriers of old memory, living witnesses of what was before. And the brave new world did not need witnesses. It needed young, strong, capable performers, ready to build the future according to given blueprints, without asking unnecessary questions about the past. The financial crises and depressions of that time are perhaps side effects of this global restructuring, periods of adaptation of the economic system to new conditions. And the strange calm of people on the ruins of their cities is explained by the fact that for many of them, these ruins were strangers. They were merely decorations that needed to be demolished to build a standard 20th century world in their place. Thus, the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893 appears before us as a reality control center. It was an assembly point where, from disparate individuals devoid of memory, a single nation with unified thinking was formed. We look at these old photographs and see not our ancestors walking at a fair. We see the moment of the birth of modern civilization, artificial, designed, and implemented through the beautiful facades of temporary pavilions. If this version made you look at history differently, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We will continue to seek the truth where others see only a history textbook. Write in the comments what you think about these people in the photos. Do you see tourists in them, or students of a new life? Until next time.